We are notifying viewers that you're live. Thank you, TikTok. YouTube appreciates it. Welcome in, welcome in. Starting a little bit late tonight. I had to eat and get the teenager through her nighttime routine. But I'm also not on any real schedule, so here I am. 8 of my friends are live. Welcome, 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 everyone. Hello and welcome. Jason Aldean's controversy? I'd have to look it up. Let's find out. Didn't know Jason Aldean had a controversy. The outrage over Jason Aldean's Try That in a Small Town. Let's find out what he had to say. Accusations of racism prompted a country music channel to pull the video, which is set at the site of an infamous lynching and race riot. Yeah, I'm not at all surprised that a country music person has done something that can be construed as racist. I want to believe we've progressed as a group, as a society, but I find myself disappointed more often than not. Let's see what this gentleman did. Country music star Jason Aldean is facing immense backlash over his new music video, Try That in a Small Town, which combines news footage of Black Lives Matter protests, violence, and crime with lyrics such as, "Try that in a small town, see how far you make it down the road. Around here we take care of our own." Oh, so that sounds like a Sundown Town song. Like, that's not even subtle. That's just a straight-up race threat. Yeah. A white guy singing up, so let's say, "Got a gun that my granddad gave me. They say one day they're gonna round up. Well, that shit might fly in the city. Good luck." Only a white guy could get away with that, because the same people who listen to this song and enjoy it had an individual with more melanin in his skin said almost exactly the same thing, they would have hated that song. So, as irritating as I might find this, I find it 0% surprising. That particular group of unmelanated folk, alabastards, as I like to call us, always seem to be looking for a fight. Hey, nerdy. We seem to got our even dozen in here, so I'll give you the intro. For your safety, remain seated throughout our journey, keeping your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the ride vehicle at all times. And please, supervise your children. Yeah, I recently had an experience with someone who I didn't even realize this about them, but spent enough time around them recently that they were comfortable revealing how just casually racist they are. And it was just that reminder that the rest of the world isn't as progressed as I sometimes seem to think it is, and it's really only because I get to be oblivious to it. I think tonight we might touch on boomer humor. I had a conversation with a coworker about that today. That was fun. So, yes or no to what? Helios. Yes or no depends on the question. Sometimes depends on the time of day. Sometimes depend on the day of the week. I do like dark humor. Oh, missed that. I am a fan of dark humor, yes. But I feel like a lot of stuff that is not exactly humorous gets couched in the terms of dark humor, when in fact it is just mean-spirited or problematic. Why is everyone banned to speak about Epstein? Oh, banned. I thought you were asking why a particular band, like a music group, was speaking about Epstein. Nobody's banned from talking about Epstein. Do I like Batman? I'm intrigued by Batman. Batman's a very deeply psychological character, but not overly. I like him. I don't adore him. Listen to you in this setting opposed to your recorded videos is surprisingly refreshing. Thank you. I find myself enjoying this almost more than recording. Like, I haven't posted a pre-recorded video other than my Tuesday previews in a while. I enjoy this more. I get more instant gratification from this. I get to talk directly to people. The videos that I record, mostly, almost exclusively in my car, is more of something that I want to say in a precise way. So it's scripted, it's recorded multiple times until I get a proper take, and then shared. But it's easier to do it that way because I'm not talking directly to someone. I do find myself enjoying this a lot, though. Yeah, I feel like Batman. See, Batman originally started out as a detective. The turn towards making him so much more psychological happened sort of in the 80s and the 90s, and it's sort of a result of having a character be so long lived in fiction that to keep it fresh, you have to add to it. So what started out as essentially a superhero version of Sherlock Holmes got turned into something new and freshened and made deeper and more interesting. Now, a friend of mine asked today about the video that had been circulating a little while back that everybody was stitching of the comedian who was making fun of Xennials essentially for not knowing how to write a check or something else. I don't even remember what the other thing was, but for not knowing how to write a check. It might have been cursive. They don't know how to write cursive. They don't know how to write a check, and basically acting like if boomers wanted to take back the world, it would be so easy. And it occurred to me that in order to find that kind of humor fun, in order to think that kind of humor is actually funny, you have to like actively not know things. Like, you have to actively not know that Google and YouTube exist, because it's probably true most Xennials don't know how to write a check. One, because it's obsolete. Like, I'm a millennial, or I'm a Gen Xer. I'm a Xennial. I'm a baby Xer, and I write at most 2 checks a year, and those aren't even necessary. They don't need to be written as checks. It's just that's how I do those things. So it's almost completely obsolete at this point. So it's not a thing that Zoomers need to know anyway. But if they did, they know to Google it. They know to go to YouTube and just type in the phrase "how to write a check" and then to watch a 3-minute tutorial. So they can teach themselves how to do these things. The younger generations, basically after X, I think X might have been the transition point towards this. But once upon a time, you did have to know how to do things or have a book explaining how to do things. But now we have the internet. Now we have the totality of human knowledge at our fingertips. And like from millennials onwards, people knew that they didn't need to know how to do things. They needed to know where to find out how to do things. They didn't need to memorize all the resources. They just needed to know where to find the resources. And so, no, a Zoomer probably can't. Your average Zoomer probably doesn't know how to write a check. Your average Zoomer probably doesn't know how to write in cursive. But they know where to find it. They very easily, and they can teach themselves. They don't require a boomer to teach them. I've never had to write a check or use cursive in my whole 10 years of my adult life. The only time that I write in cursive is when I sign my name. That's it. And so it's just a signature. It's just an autograph at that point. But and it's not an entire generation. It's not all baby boomers. But the ones who are the loudest about it and the proudest about making fun of younger generations for not knowing things are the reason that those younger generations don't know things. Because instead of seeing someone who doesn't know how to do something and being like, oh, I'm so sorry that nobody ever took the time to teach you how to do that. Let me teach you how to do that so that you know. Instead of doing that, they look at kids who don't know how to do things and mock them for it. And it's like, how are you going to mock a generation for not knowing how to do a thing you failed to teach them how to do? Like, I had to teach myself how to tie a necktie. I went online and I looked up and I can now tie a four in the hand knot, a half Windsor, a Windsor, and a bow tie. But I taught myself because I knew where to go look for the information. So for a boomer to be up on stage thinking that it's funny to be like, oh, look at these Gen Xers, look at these millennials who don't know how to tie a necktie. One, that's your failure. You didn't teach them how to do this thing that you think is so important and is becoming less and less important. But two, they don't need to know how because they know how to find out how to use your 1A on the internet. Yeah. Oh, also, did you see the bill that was put forward that would require you to use a state ID to use your 1A on the internet? I did not. That seems like a particular political party that pays lip service to freedom while passing laws that restrict freedom. But no, there was this definite shift of essentially not outsourcing but externalizing information, where once upon a time you did need to know. And it's like, it's the same sort of shift. It's like a specifically technological version of the shift that occurred when we could write things down. Because once upon a time, history and culture was passed down verbally. And so stories had to be memorized. That's why you had bards and troubadours. You had people whose entire job and existence was based on memorizing stories and passing them on. And then we learned how to write. And so then we could write those stories down. And so people didn't have to memorize them anymore because you could go find it in a book. And so we're having the same shift, and it's happened already. Certain people are not accepting it because certain people learned a way of doing things before that shift occurred and now insist upon doing them in that obsolete way. But that shift has now occurred with information in electronic form, because you don't even need to keep it. Like I have this library. I have this bookshelf is half the size of 3 other bookshelves. So I have basically 6 more of this size of bookshelves of books in this office. And I don't need that because all of these books that I have in here are available electronically. I can have every book in this library on a Kindle that is the size of my phone or slightly larger. And so we've figured out how to externalize information. So we don't need to use up our brain space memorizing procedures. We just have to remember where to find them when we need to use them. because we don't need them all the time. Or have you noticed a lot of older generations look at technology like it's magic almost? Yeah, because I think it was Sagan, it might have been Asimov, who said that any science that is sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. I mean, we essentially, like, we have science fiction technology in the palm of our hand. I am using what used to be science fiction technology right now to do this live stream. Cell phones, if you had someone travel from 100 years, just 100 years in the past to today, cell phones would seem like magic. It would seem like alien technology from another culture in another corner of the galaxy. Do you think that internet data from today will be easily available to people in the future? Yeah, and it's all about the ability to connect to it, because it exists. It's not in a physical space, but you do need access to where the information is saved. And so the internet, in a way, is a vault, and the key is making the keys accessible to as many people as possible. And so that involves a lot of physical processes. That involves laying wires, building towers, so that the information which is available can be accessed and then used. Thank you, Terrell. I love answering questions. But there is part of me, and this is probably it's a similar sentiment to what I see in boomers largely, but I do see it in my own generation. But this clinging to the past, this like, oh, you don't know how to write a check mentality, as if like you should know how to do this thing even though it's going extinct, is the reason that I keep books and that I keep documents. Like, one of the main things that I have books that have like printed copies of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. I have copies of the Bible, even though I am an atheist. Because if all information is only digital and only electronic, it can be erased and lost forever. And so there's this little part in the back of my brain that's like, I want to have a library with at least like the most important documents, in case some cataclysmic thing, like in case hundreds of EMPs go off and the internet gets erased. So then the information is still available. This is generalized, so to speak, but do you think libraries are dead or still relevant? Yeah, and that's kind of why I have my own personal library. I think libraries, though, are important because they give access to information, even if it has to be in printed form. And I don't know if you're talking about specifically books, but like libraries having internet access. Libraries are absolutely vital. They do have to keep pace with the changes in the storage of the data, because once upon a time libraries were just repositories for books, because that's how information was stored. Now, with information being stored mostly electronically, libraries need to be more focused on providing access to the internet. So having the physical books, cool, nice, but providing access to electronic information, because that is the purpose of a library. Like, we think library and we think books, we think paper, and we think printed material, but the concept of a library is information. And if the information is mostly stored electronically, then providing access to electronic storage is the purpose of a library now. I am kind of fascinated by what the next step might be. Like, what the next form of information storage might be past the internet. Because when we transitioned from memory to printed paper and printed documents, no one could have conceived of electronic storage of information. I won't say no one. There were probably visionaries who could have, but couldn't really grasp the concept. It couldn't really grasp the breadth of the idea they were having. And so now we have electronic storage, and we can't conceive of what comes next. Like, whatever is going to be the next form of information storage is beyond us at this point. DNA storage is cool, the whole internet in a thumb. Yeah, well, and I kind of wonder if quantum storage might be what's next. Essentially encoding information into the fabric of reality. But that kind of brings everything full circle, because at its most fundamental, everything is information. Because matter is atoms, and atoms are subatomic particles. And subatomic particles, when you get all the way down to it, are waves. It's basically all just quantum information. And so I don't know that it'll be the next step, but an eventual step may just be being able to access information at its actual fundamental source, rather than having to convert it into, like, words are a conversion of information. It's a medium of information. Electronic storage is still a medium, because it's electricity and it's ones and zeros. And so the idea of taking away the need to translate or encode and decode information and just be able to interact directly with the information might be the next step, might be the final step. But it feels weird trying to conceive of it, because I understand it's a thing I can't really conceive. And so I'm trying to articulate an idea I know I don't understand, which is a very strange thing to do, but also very fascinating. So we went from boomer humor to quantum information storage. I put the troll bait out. I was kind of wondering if Far From Here was going to show up. He showed up during our Tuesday D&D game, and then called in a few additional trolls who I think just got bored. Like, one of them made 3 or 4 comments, and I apparently didn't react in a sufficient way, and they just left. Type 3 civilization, but in storage. Yeah. And then that that raises questions about, like, the human mind's interaction with reality, because the mind is energy, and the information is stored in energy, and, like, you almost that is what science fiction is for exploring those kinds of ideas and how they might unfold. Because I grew up I was a child of the 80s. I grew up in the 90s, and there was an early Keanu Reeves movie, pre-Matrix, called Johnny Mnemonic. And in that movie, Keanu Reeves played the main character, Johnny Mnemonic, and he was a courier. He was an information courier. And couriers had implants in their brains where you could plug, it was a computer, and you could plug a computer into their brain and download information straight into their brain. And then they would transport themselves with that information to wherever it needed to go. And I think part of the plot, and I might be adding this, part of the plot I think involved taking information into what amounted to a dead zone, like an electronics dead zone, where the information couldn't be transmitted in, so it had to be physically carried. What baffled me for a long time is the data has weight. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Yeah. What baffled me, I started reading Stephen Hawking's Theory of Everything. And I remember I had to put it down not too far in, because he explains how gravity actually works. And so we have this concept of, the Earth orbiting around the sun. And we imagine that the Earth moves in a ellipsoidal orbit. It moves in an oval around the sun. And we think that that's what gravity is. Essentially, that gravity is a string that attaches the Earth to the sun, so when the Earth goes around the sun, it spins. But what gravity actually is the sun, the mass of the sun, warping space and essentially creating a bowl. And so the Earth is not moving in a circular or a round orbit. The Earth is moving in a straight line through curved space. Essentially, it's like the sun has created a bowl in space, and the Earth is moving around the rim. So it's moving in what looks like a circle, but it's actually moving in a straight line through space that is curved. And I had to put that book down, and I had to process that for a few weeks, because it was just one of those things, for some reason, that very fundamentally reshaped the way I considered reality. And yeah, the idea of data having weight is another one of those things. That's tough to process. I know, right? But then that does, once I grasped that, it made it easier to understand the concept that if you were to travel away from the Earth in a straight line infinitely, you would eventually return to the Earth. And once I understood the way that gravity actually works, it made perfect sense, because the universe, the model of the universe that really makes that make sense, is essentially a donut. And hey, Lime, welcome in. Essentially, the universe in this model is shaped like a donut. So by going in a straight line outwards, you're moving through space that is curved around into itself in every dimension. So you will eventually come back to the same point you left. But understanding that was easier once I understood how gravity is actually mass warping space. So we started with the cosmology today, Lime. Well, we started with particular generations making fun of other generations for not knowing how to do obsolete things that were never taught to them by the people now mocking them for not knowing them. Like, you don't know how to change your oil. Well, no, I don't know how to change my oil, but I have a smartphone that has access to the internet, and I know how to get to YouTube. So I could go on YouTube and search how to change the oil of my make and model of car, and I could watch a tutorial at the end of which I will know how to change my oil. And I don't have to memorize it, and I don't have to remember it for next time, because the next time that I personally would need to do this, that video will still be there. I still have trouble wrapping my head around the double slit experiment. Yeah. So when you get back to Earth, how much time would have passed? That is the question. I mean, it depends on how fast you're going. If you're moving at the speed of light, then you're dealing with time dilation. I mean, if you're moving at any speed, you're dealing with some level of time dilation. By the time you get back to Earth, the amount of space you would have had to travel through, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine the amount of time. Yeah, the double slit experiment is another one. I need to freshen up on that. It's been a little while since I looked at it. But from the last time I read up on it, it was because there was new data on essentially the double slit experiment. If not proved, gave solid evidence for the actual reality of time travel, at least at the subatomic level. Because it essentially it showed instances in which effect preceded cause, like where the thing that caused the thing to happen happened after the thing that happened. Hey, Bilbo Kenobi. And see, the deeper I've gotten into quantum mechanics, from a recreational perspective, I'm not going to pretend to understand it in any really like useful, productive way, but the more that I've read about it, the easier it is for me to accept things that are usually treated as supernatural. If not accept them as true or real, accept the possibility that they may be real, because of how counterintuitive things are at the quantum level and in quantum mechanics, and how little we understand. Like how little we understand reality just at the physical sciences level, and then how much less we understand quantum mechanics and things at the quantum level. And so it seems absurd to say that certain things are not true and cannot be true in the physical universe. Yeah, determinism versus quantum mechanics, so hard to understand. Yeah. Determinism is, and that's determinism and free will is a theological argument I get into when people want to claim that there is an all-knowing God, but also that humans have free will, and I'm like, you can't have both. It just doesn't work that way. But the thing is that it's also possible that we don't have free will even if there are no gods. Because if the universe is deterministic, there is no free will, whether or not there is anything outside of the universe. So the question isn't, can you have determinism as free will? Or can you have free will with a god? The question is the universe deterministic? The other questions can then be addressed once that is solved. But quantum mechanics is an undeterminate state. Yeah. It is quantum chaos was how I described it. Until observed. And then once observed, it collapses into a single definite state. And it was observed doesn't necessarily mean it had to be observed by a conscious, sentient observer. Observation is essentially at the quantum level is interaction. Which is a thing I learned after making a video in which I poorly interpreted the Copenhagen interpretation in a way. I don't know if I actually made the follow-up video, but I wanted to make a follow-up video because I got criticized by scientifically minded people so much worse for my Copenhagen interpretation video than I ever got criticized by religious people for my atheism videos, which I thought was kind of fun. At some point in the future, we're going to have the AI free will conversation. Yeah. Well, and that will be. But see, and I wonder if AI, when I think of AI, I kind of reverse engineer it to humans, because if it's just all information, well, and I guess the question isn't should they have free will, but whether or not free will actually exists. Because if free will exists, then they will have it. Like we can't make them not have. We can't make artificial intelligence not have free will because free will is a part of the universe. If free will doesn't exist, then AI won't have it because we don't have it because it just doesn't exist. But I conceptually reverse engineer artificial intelligence to human intelligence, because if it exists, it's intelligence. Are they able to have free will? Well, and the question is then what constitutes intelligence? Because we consider ourselves natural intelligence, but why? Like, is it just because of our own anthrocentric concept of ourselves as this higher being? Like, everything about us is matter and energy and information. Our minds are composed of energy and information. Artificial intelligence would be the same. It would be matter, energy, and information. Because if it's running on a computer, the hardware is the matter, the software is the energy, and the information is what's being stored and computed and crunched and reformulated. So to me, there's not a difference between human intelligence and what we would call artificial intelligence. The question is, can we create, build, construct what amounts to a brain capable of the computing power of the human brain? Because intelligence, what we consider intelligence, is whatever is running on the human brain. So the mind. If we can quantify the amount of information and the processing power of the mind and the brain, if we can build a computer that can process that much information that quickly, we've just created intelligence. It's not artificial. It's real. It exists. We created it. It is as real as the intelligence in our brains. And so if we have free will, an intelligence of that level would also have free will. We've also only looked at AI for the last less than 100 years. What can it actually become? Yeah. And I'm always fascinated by our human notion that we are so much more developed, such a higher life form than other forms of life. When we are such a young species, like on the 24-hour clock of the history of the Earth, we've been around less than a second, I think. And so it's very strange that we consider ourselves so much higher than all the other life on Earth when we've been around so much less? Would their intelligence supersede our own? I think it comes down to processing power. I think a very important part, though, would be whether or not the whatever we create also has empathy and ethics, and because intelligence could be defined as just computational power, like the ability to solve problems, the ability to process information. The human mind has some other facets that are not just that are not what a computer, that are things a computer can't do. But I do wonder if those things are features of a computer with enough processing power. So if we were to build a computer with sufficient processing power, I'm intrigued to know, would it have emotion? Like, is emotion the kind of process that requires so much processing power that that brains can do it? Because we see it in animals. I see it. I have 3 cats. I see it in my cats. We've seen it in all sorts of species. So brains, organic intelligence, organic life has enough processing power to run the software of emotion. Basically, you need a system with enough memory and power. So we just haven't built a computer powerful enough yet. And if we do, I would venture to say, I would guess, I won't say I would hypothesize, I would guess we would see that happen. We would see an quote unquote artificial, because I wouldn't consider it artificial, we would see an intelligence, an inorganic intelligence with emotional capability, with ethical capability, with possibly even theological and philosophical capability, because it would have the sufficient processing power. We are basically very, very complex if-then statements. Right, yeah, more processing power could beat us. Yeah, if we could build a computer with more processing power than the human brain, it would be, by definition, more intelligent. And I've been wondering if AI and quantum computing are going to go hand in hand, because quantum computing, I feel like, is the level of computing you need to achieve intelligence, inorganic intelligence. That's what I'm going to start calling it. I'm not going to call it artificial intelligence. It's inorganic intelligence. But I feel like quantum computing is the key to inorganic intelligence. Would it be smart to add theological implements? I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Are you saying, like, basically to introduce theological elements to an inorganic intelligence? Because you can choose to, or you can choose to not. Right, okay, yeah. So basically, like, choosing whether or not to put that data into the processor. You can choose to, or you can choose not to. But then I don't think it matters, because when you look at humans, we developed theological notions. We developed belief on our own. And so if you create an inorganic intelligence with the processing power of organic intelligence, whether or not you put that there, it will develop its own. And so we would wind up eventually with inorganic intelligence that created its own religion. AI Prime Directive. Yeah. Now, whether it would consider us to be God because we created it, or if it would consider us to be equivalent to it because it is intelligent and we are intelligent. Hey, Bearded. We started with boomer humor and have worked our way through cosmology into artificial intelligence. Inorganic intelligence is what I'm calling it now. But I wonder if an inorganic intelligence might not actually consider us less intelligent, because if the computer that runs an inorganic intelligence has more processing power than the human brain, then it would be more intelligent. Seems like a classic stream then, right? I used to, the last attempt I made at a live stream, a regular live stream, was called Sidetracked, because every time I started on a topic, I would eventually get sidetracked. And of course, the we are AI angle. Yeah, well, and that's where I reverse engineer the concept of artificial intelligence back to us. because we are Marshall. No, we are farmers. No, we are organic computers. We are matter, energy, and information. And an inorganic intelligence would be the exact same components. So at a fundamental level, I can't separate that. I can't pretend that organic intelligence is qualitatively different than inorganic intelligence. We are the world. We are individual housing units of a single being of energy. The collective of all human minds. The collective of all minds of all living creatures. Because it's the same energy. It's the energy that exists around this planet. Data and exocomps from Star Trek seem like good examples for this topic. Yeah. And the question in terms of computing power, generally speaking, historically has been you have more computing power with a bigger computer. But it's actually kind of worked the opposite direction as we've miniaturized the components. Because like the computer that put men on the moon took up a warehouse and had less computing power than the cell phone that I'm using to live stream right now. So the physical computers have gotten smaller as the components have gotten smaller. And so a computer today with the components at the size that we have them, but a computer the size of the one that put men on the moon. So the components in this cell phone, but as enough of them wired up to fill a warehouse. I wonder at what point I wonder how big of a computer you have to build and how much smaller you have to make the components. Because then when I think about characters like Data, you think about like, oh, he's a humanoid size. He's got a humanoid size brain. Yes, but a positronic brain with components that are microscopic. And this is where then it gets into quantum computing. If you can make the components small enough, you can make a computer large enough, a computer with enough components, that it would be able to process that much information, and you end up with intelligence. What about we mix and integrate technology into our bodies? Yeah, I can't remember what there's. I think it's called H+, but it's the idea of essentially augmenting the human body. And that's another idea that I reverse engineer, because the idea of enhancing the human body with cybernetics is sort of the reverse of the idea of taking your mind out of your body and putting it in a robot. Because if you replace enough parts with cybernetic replacements, you get a ship of Theseus thing, but eventually, if all the organic parts are replaced with cybernetic parts, you're a robot. And the easier way of going about that is taking your mind out of your body in the first place and just putting it straight into a robot, or putting it straight into a computer that can house that much information. Yes, and it's funny that it's cyberpunk, because I don't know what the actual numbers are, but like a very large portion of the population is walking around. It's not cybernetics, but walking around with prosthetics, is walking around with, there are people walking around with 3D printed organs. So it's not it's not something they were born with. It was made. It is manufactured with, joint replacements, with mechanical parts. So we're already doing it. The amount of energy power the warehouse computer would use might be massive. If you could do it, would you do it? I will come back to that. Yeah. Yes, that is another very important point, is how much energy it takes to run that thing. Versus, and that, so then you essentially get to how would you build something that could create its own energy. And then you start looking at the human body, because you're looking at a system that is running that level of computing, but the body feeds the brain. And then we have this process by which you have to eat every day. You have to imbibe atomic matter. You have to imbibe matter that your body then processes into. So you wind up essentially trying to build a computer, trying to build a structure around the computer that will feed the computer energy without taking up energy necessary for other things. spirited you asked. If you could do it, would you do it? I think you're talking about cybernetic enhancements. Depends on what they are. I mean, if it's a threat to my consciousness, probably not. I would probably consider it and think about it long and hard, but probably not, because the notion of losing my sense of self is something I wouldn't risk. In terms of like replacing other parts, like, you know, like give me a cybernetic arm like the Winter Soldier. Yeah, that I would almost certainly do. We have been dependent on our own tools since fire replaced our homeostasis. Yeah. How small could a nuclear power source be? I don't know. Like, could you build a nuclear power source? That wasn't that Otto Octavius's objective in Spider-Man 2 was to harness the power of the sun in the palm of his hand. Like, how small can you make? And I think that is a question of switching from nuclear fusion to nuclear fission. But yeah, I don't know how small you can make it. Back to the phone, the term is technology convergence. Okay. Also, DNA can store up a lot of data. Yeah. And so, like, it's an interesting question then, in terms of not even cybernetics, but like storing information in the cells of the body, in essentially the empty spaces, in the atoms or the molecules of the body. Totally unrelated, but have you read the short story The Egg by Andy Weir? Jonathan, I not only read it, I recorded it. If you run through my playlist, I think it's a playlist called Literary Readings. I read Andy Weir's The Egg, because it's only 1,000 words. The T-800 was nuclear power. That's right, yep. Maybe some kind of antimatter composite particle that is Turing complete. Yeah. Too bad we don't have Tony Stark's heart. Right, yeah. Yeah, and also the question of dark matter, dark energy, exotic energy, esoteric energy. Like, that's the thing, is there's so much just about the natural world that we don't understand. There's so much that we don't know that we, in our lifetimes, we won't even be able to know, because that information will not be available to us in any way that we can collect it. So we are drawing conclusions and making assumptions based on what we know to be incomplete information. And if you integrate nanotechnology and mix it stem cells, you could reverse or stop aging. Yeah, I feel like reversing aging, and it is important to point out that all of these things only have an impact on wealthy people, because your average person would not be able to afford cybernetic implants, nanotechnology, quantum computing, artificial, inorganic intelligence. But I feel like stopping aging is probably going to be the first major medical breakthrough when it comes to nanotechnology and quantum computing and inorganic intelligence. Like, that seems like the simplest thing to do first, which is then going to create a really interesting environment, because if then you don't die of old age, like, that alters the way that society functions. Hey, cleaner. I can't remember the name of the writer. There was a short story called "To Be or Not to Be," but it was letters. To be or Vonnegut. Of course, it was Vonnegut. Yeah, to be R0 to be or not to be, and it was a short story about a man living in a society in which people don't die anymore. Like, you don't die of old age. And the main character was deciding, but also because people don't die, births are restricted. So someone can't be born until someone chooses to die. And the main character was considering that the T2BR02B is the phone number you call up when you are done living. And so he was considering whether or not he wanted to be done living so that someone else could be born. I think the simplest application would be harvesting material from asteroids. Oh, yeah. there was a Sam Rockwell movie called Moon, and just the most local thing, the moon, the regolith of the moon is rich in helium-3, the H3 isotope, which has a lot of, it is extremely valuable and has a lot of important scientific applications. Gen Z are young for hundreds of years instead of decades. Yeah. Then you have to worry about eugenics. Star Trek's eugenics wars. Yeah. And that is the fear when all of these concepts are fascinating in a hypothetical way. Once you start adding in people and the tendencies that people on average have, it gets scary, because then you wind up with fascist tendencies in medical fields and in scientific fields, and it gets really dangerous. We've seen that sort of thing in the last 100 years. It's extremely devastating. So, like, I love talking about these concepts, and I love the ideas of them, and I love writing about them, and I love reading fiction about them. I don't think I would like them in reality because of how they would be perpetuated and perpetrated. Military would definitely fund this super supreme soldier. Yep. 100%. Which is why I remember making a video about that very early. That might have been one of my first videos, was talking about that the reason the super soldier serum was called the super soldier serum, it didn't make someone a super soldier. It amplified one's physical abilities. The reason it was called the super soldier serum is because the military funded it, because the government and the military were the only organizations with the funding required to experiment and create that serum. And because they created it, they got to determine how it was used. And so, of course, the military is going to use a serum that increases your physical abilities to create soldiers. And it was interesting because about maybe a year, 2 years later, Neil deGrasse Tyson was actually talking about the conversation about the fact that private industry does things better than government. Which is true, but private industry never does things first, or very rarely does things first, because doing things first is a huge risk that could cost a lot of money, and private industry is risk averse. Private industry doesn't want to invest that kind of money and potentially lose all of it. The government will do things and will spend money without there being a huge monetary return on investment. So the government will fund things first, and then once private industry sees them work, private industry will say, oh, well, we'll fund that now because we know it didn't fail. And so now it's a less risky investment. And so the idea of a super soldier serum, I don't think they've really carried all the way out to its logical conclusion, because at a certain point, private industry is going to start creating its own enhancement serum. Although I feel like the MCU has done, and Marvel, I think, in the comics has addressed that. They addressed it with the mutant growth hormone. They've obviously not done that in the MCU because they only just got the rights to the mutants back. Even a single leader in theory is good as long as they have full knowledge and are not corrupt. Right. So yeah, Jonathan, that is the problem, is the type of person who is most suited for power is the type of person who does not want power. So when you have positions that people can strive for, you're going to get corrupt people, because people who want power are I won't say they are they're not always the people who shouldn't have power, but people who actively want power usually tend to be people who shouldn't have as much power. Instead of having soldiers in exosuits, using nanotech to enhance their soldiers. Yeah, I like how the MCU tackles super soldier serum with Captain Carter. Oh yeah. But that, and in that video I talked about that. That was why Erskine was so important, and that's why John Walker is a perfect foil to Steve Rogers, because the military in Captain America: The First Avenger, Tommy Lee Jones's character, he had all his recruits. He had good soldiers. He had people who were going to follow orders and be soldiers. And he wanted to give his enhancement serum to them so that they would be good soldiers who would follow orders and also had the physical capabilities to destroy the opposition. Erskine understood that because the serum amplified everything about a person, it had to be given to someone who was a good person first. And that's why Erskine was so important to creating Captain America, because he picked Steve Rogers, who would never have been picked had it not been for Erskine. And John Walker is the foil to that because he was the military's pick. He was the good soldier. And we saw what it did to him. It took all of the violent tendencies that he mostly kept in check before the serum and amplified all of those. And so he was still a good soldier. The problem was then once the government realized that he was doing, that he was essentially committing war crimes, they had to disavow him, despite the fact that he was exactly what they made him to be. And he did what he did because it was what they wanted. The problem was that he didn't care about the rules anymore, because he became essentially the German, the Übermensch. He became the man so powerful that the rules no longer applied to him. In truth, America would have way more walkers. Oh, America would have almost exclusively walkers, especially if the government and the military had control over who got the serum. Like, the idea that there would be an Erskine who would have enough sway to pick a Steve Rogers over a John Walker, I won't say it's not possible, but it's like a nat 20 chance. There's a 5% chance of that happening. It would be almost exclusively John Walkers. And having a woman be the super soldier could definitely change society, especially during World War II. Yes, absolutely. You no longer have Rosie the Riveter. You have Captain America. Or in that case, Captain Carter, who would have, I guess, rightfully been Captain Britain, although Captain Britain, I believe, was Brian Braddock. Until recently, Teenie Howard's run, I think Captain Britain was Betsy Braddock. Teenie Howard's going to be at GalaxyCon Raleigh coming up next weekend. Oh no. Let's see. I think that is this weekend coming up. GalaxyCon Raleigh, home. Yep, July 27th to the 30th. 5 days. Karen Gillan's going to be there. And Grant Gustin, Christopher Lloyd. I mean, there's a lot of celebrities. And that's been my, I won't say issue, but when I go to GalaxyCon, I know GalaxyCon is more focused on celebrities with less focus on comic creators. What defines something as being a performance-enhancing substance? That is an excellent question. I don't know legally, but, I mean, caffeine is a performance-enhancing substance. Depends on the performance. Depends on how it enhances it. I've been keeping up with Secret Invasion, but I haven't seen the wow moment yet. For a second I thought you were talking about the comics. I was like, that was a while ago. No. I haven't seen the MCU show yet. I'm a bit behind. I'm way behind on the shows. Secret Invasion is the next one I'm going to watch, but I still haven't seen Moon Knight, She-Hulk, or Miss Marvel. Secret Invasion is the next one I'm going to watch, and then I'm going to watch Miss Marvel because I'll need to going into the Marvels. Let's see what it is. Do you have any thoughts on possibly living in a simulation? Would smelling salts count as enhancing drugs? Comic Secret Invasion is legit. Yeah, it absolutely is. Any thoughts on living in a simulation? I mean, I have many thoughts. I don't have any opinions. Like, I don't think that we are or think that we aren't. It's one of those things that could be true, and that's about as far as I can take it. If it's true, then it's true. And if it's not true, then it's not true. I have to essentially choose to exist as if we are not, because if we're not, then the amount of control that we can have is lower than the amount of control we could theoretically have if we were living in a simulation and knew it. And I feel like you have to operate, if those are the possibilities, you have to operate under the assumption you have less control. Would smelling salts count as? I mean, it depends on what you're enhancing, how you're enhancing it. America would certainly have a bunch of space marines. Yeah, I mean, we literally created an entire branch of the military, and then made a sitcom about it. God, that's still. It was like that particular reality TV game show host watched Starship Troopers and thought it was a documentary. Yeah, I don't know, because and with performance enhancing procedures, like blood doping is a performance enhancing procedure that's not a drug. It's completely natural. You're not even taking anything that's not yours. You're taking your own blood out of your body, letting your body replenish that blood so that you're back to full, essentially, and then re-injecting the blood so that you're over full. Essentially, you're overclocking your circulatory system to increase your VO2 max, I think. Simulation theory could be true, but that leads to nihilism for me personally. See, the thing is though, like nihilism, I don't think I don't need to believe simulation theory in order for nihilism to still kind of make sense. Like, I think it's both true that there is meaning, but that existence is inherently meaningless. Like, I think that meaning is created, and that we as conscious beings, intelligent beings, create meaning. And so I am both nihilistic and constructionistic. I think there is a term for the creation of meaning and intent and information. But I don't think that the universe inherently has meaning. It has to be constructed.